Welcome to the Never Going Pro podcast about riding bikes and being parents and trying super hard at both. My name is Ken, the Badger Nowell. I'm on Team Dirt, stands for Dads Inside Riding Trainers, and it's a group of dads that met on the Zwift platform, riding early in the morning, trying to get our training in and our hustle on before we got our kids ready and got to work. And along the way, we've met some really cool people, such as Shane and Chris, which I will introduce now. Shane, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Shane Gaffney. I'm the owner and head coach at GC Coaching. I'm a level 1 USS Cycling coach, a certified power-based training coach, and I've done a bunch of work for Zwift with their structured training plans and the Build Me Up training plan. Chris, do you want to go?
Yeah, I'm Chris Gorney, and I'm pretty much none of the things that Shane just called himself. I am just a regular dad. I got involved with Dirt and Zwift because a year and a half ago, my wife and I had a little girl, and our time was pretty limited. Our little girl got sick early on, so I wanted to stay home and stay somewhat fit, so I got into Zwift and just kind of fell in love with it. I kind of came on as a marketing consultant and kind of a strategic specialist, which is what I do kind of in my regular job, and I just fell in love with it. So that's it. My role is to kind of be the non-Shane, the guy who's just trying really hard every day and probably taking myself a little too seriously while cycling outside with my friends.
Sounds good. Well, thank you both for joining up tonight. And so one thing that we aim to do with this podcast, obviously we all met on Zwift, so that's important to us. And I think the biggest thing that we've seen that all of us on Team Dirt have had in common is time constraints and really finding balance between family, balance between our own ambitions and training goals, getting healthy again, which I've seen lots of guys come in and lose weight and hit all kinds of fitness records, and also just having a good time and not taking ourselves too seriously. And so what we've done is we reached out to some of our members, and if you are familiar with Team Dirt, Dads Inside Riding Trainers, we have over 2,000 Facebook members, over about 1,500 Strava members, and a pretty large roster. We're one of the biggest teams in the world. And so we crowdsourced some questions, and we went to our members, and we wanted to find out what they wanted to hear, especially from Shane, because he does have a lot of experience coaching. And all of us, we have a lot of questions about how we can reach our goals. Shane, if you want to take a look at our questions and introduce some of them, and we can start to dig in.
Sure. So the first one that got the most kind of upvotes on Facebook was the advantages of planning out a yearly training plan versus going week to week or racing and riding all the time.
You're saying like racing versus only doing workouts, right?
I think that's what the question was about. Yeah. So it was kind of, can I race every day of the week, or is it better to do more structure? And then how far out should I plan that structure?
I mean, I have a slew of questions just around this topic right here. So, for instance, what happens to somebody when they race every day? And because what I discovered for me was when I started racing 3-4 days a week on Zwift, for a long time I kept getting faster. I kept hitting power records, but that didn't last forever. I did that for about a year and kept getting better and better, and then I started to hit a plateau. So I guess the question is why? What happens to the body or the mind or your system that keeps you from making gains by doing that?
Sure. Once you expose your body to the same stimulus over and over and over again, you're going to get diminishing returns on that same stimulus. Once you're doing a lot of intensity, you can get a really good uptick in your fitness relatively early, and you can keep that fitness uptick pretty consistent as long as the races are challenging you. The problem is once you reach your peak of return on training investment doing races, eventually you're going to plateau like you experienced. And then you have to change the training stimulus by either increasing the duration, increasing the intensity again, increasing the frequency, things like that. But if you just keep doing the same thing week in, week out, you will definitely make improvements, but those improvements will diminish over time.
Well, and I think, I mean, as you say that, like, it kind of blows my mind because, like, I might be the crazy person, but when I get on Zwift, it doesn't occur to me to even race. Like, I was just blasted by a bunch of friends because they always wanted to do races, and the times never worked out. And so eventually I just started just doing workout plans. And so my goal became to just get on and basically punish the hell out of myself for an hour. I might have almost blacked out on my bike only once, which is what happens when your air conditioning doesn't work well and your fan stops working while you're riding.
Ouch.
That's a true story. But like I started getting really, really bored. And then I even found out, because, if we're talking about Zwift, like, it's not as simple as just races versus workouts, because the racing on Zwift actually takes like game skill. Because if you just get on and hammer, so it's like the difference to me between racing and training is actually bigger than just effort, perceived effort, and gains. It's like you kind of have to practice both. And then, you only have, what is it, Shane? You said like the average rider, like the average, like a dedicated amateur, which is what I'd consider myself and Ken. Like, we've got like 6 to 7 hours a week.
Yeah, in my experience, it's usually around 5 to 7 hours a week, and that consists of 3 to 4 rides per week, give or take.
I heard Ken does exactly 7 hours and 1 minute per week.
That's good.
That's pretty much, yeah. If you look at last year, that's pretty accurate. It's right around like 7 to 8 hours, like, very consistent. And that's the only slot that life allows. And if you see on, these weeks where I go on vacation, it's either way less or way more, so if I'm at home on vacation, I can get 10 hours in, and that might happen once a year.
So how do I pick? Like, how do I pick to do, like, where's the balance of, like, because, outdoors is easy, right? It's like, I've got a race on August 15th, and so I'm going to throw a training plan on and I'm going to do it. But with Zwift, it's different because, like, I can race Monday, Tuesday, I can race any day, any time now.
Right. I don't think the intensity is a bad thing. The problem is if you overdo the intensity, you can get burnt out. And, like Ken was saying, you also will eventually reach that diminishing return point where if you do the same thing every single week, eventually you're not going to get any return on training investment. And the other issue too is if you're recovered before a race, you can dig a lot deeper during that race. And that's going to create, I think, a much better stimulus to train, and your training response is going to be better. As opposed to doing a race fatigued, you're not going to be able to dig as deep, and that's going to result in maybe a decreased response. So your hard riding and your easy riding all turns into moderate paced riding. So you're kind of losing that polarized training approach, which has been proven to be pretty successful for most people. And the less trained you are, the less important it is to do like really structured training, because you can get a return on fitness just by riding your bike more. So it's really once you get to a point where you're becoming fitter and you're getting not your biological potential, but once you're kind of maximizing whatever time you have available to train, that's when it's important to become more structured, because that's when you actually can change what you're doing. But if you're kind of, out of shape, or you haven't been training for years and years and years, the structure I don't think is crucial unless you feel like you're already at that plateau point.
So less is more, so that more is more.
Kind of. And it's also important in the beginning to have fun, because if you start off and just drill yourself with structure, because structure is very mentally demanding, especially if you're time crunched and you have other life stress going on. You have to enter a really stressful structure workout pretty fresh mentally and also physically to get the most out of it. So if you have a busy day at work, or you have a sick kid at home or whatever, then you're not going to be able to dig as deep in that workout. And if anything, you're going to fail the workout, which is going to demotivate you for the next time you do it.
So Ken, tell me this, Ken, because like you race way more, right? Like what's your like best and worst race experience?
So when, obviously the best race experiences, winning is a lot of fun, and I have won a handful of races. And so I started as a cat.
Clean though, right? Like, did you do an appropriate drug test before
this
race?
I did. Yep, I did. Racing clean. Got a clean tattoo on my arm.
That's good.
What I did is I started as a Cat C, and you touched briefly on the gamification, and I had a really, really hard time at first staying in the pack. I was shooting forward through the pack and then falling behind, and shooting forward to fall. I was just basically yo-yoing through the pack. And it was really exhausting. You just can't do that but so many times, before, I just popped. And even as a C racer, um, I'd never had a very strong sprint, so I could find ways to win by attacking at strategic points and, gapping the whole group. But I was never really able to win in very many sprints. And then in category B, it's just so competitive, and I've only won a handful of like really small races. For me, the reward comes in being able to be helpful to my teammates, because I mean, it's just such a strong field, and it's very rewarding to, we're on a Discord chat channel, and we can come up with strategies. And my role has been is sort of a long range climber. The climbs that are over 5 minutes long, that's where I really even have the that's my biggest strength. And being able to make the race hard for other GC contenders, I can do that in those areas. But one thing that I see a lot of is, whether it's comments on Zwift riders or even Reddit, you see people coming onto the Zwift platform and they're like, I'm way out of shape. I haven't exercised in a long time. I'm just getting into this. What training program should I do? I think, Shane touched on this a minute ago. Basically, it seems to me, and I've had experience training athletes before as well, is you can almost do anything when you're really out of shape and get in better shape. It doesn't really matter. You can be very non-specific in what you're trying to do. And so I think a lot of people that are new to Zwift are putting pressure on themselves to do certain events, certain training programs. And it's just like, just ride, go have fun, hit the like button on some people, give people some ride-ons, and make some friends, and the friends will keep you coming back.
Ken, you and I met on Zwift, and we're basically best friends now. Ken, everyone should know we did have a miscommunication, and he sent me a used kit to try on, and I thought he was sending me a new kit to try on. And so I started wearing it without washing it, not knowing the amount of sweat that I was just absorbing through my skin of just Ken's funk. So I now know we wear the same size kit, and I'm closer to him.
So, Shane, what advice would you have for somebody who maybe isn't very fit, doesn't ride very much, and is just getting into Zwift for the first time?
It's a good question.
Sure. So I think my favorite kind of national board is the Canadian High Performance Sport Institute right now. They have a really good long-term athlete development framework that they use that I like to implement with my athletes too. A few different stages, but the first really 4, they're an active start, the fundamentals, and then learn how to train, and then train to train. So active start and fundamentals are really when you're just having fun, getting some awareness of the sport, maybe competing in local organizations or local sports. Once you do that for a few years, get some experience on your belt, enjoy the sport, and you want to get more serious about it, then it's actually learning, how to train, which is kind of where a coach may come in at the very ground level and teach you about, progressive overload, recovery weeks, how to judge your training stress, how to involve nutrition and hydration, just the real basic stuff. Then once you feel like you have a good grasp on that, then it's time to train to actually train for a specific event. So I feel like people that are coming in new to Zwift, they jump right to level 4, which is train to train or even train to compete. And they miss the fundamentals. They miss learn how to train, and they miss, just an active start, just having fun. So I think the first thing is kind of give yourself a little bit of a break and just go in, enjoy the training, enjoy Zwift for what it is, make some friends, maybe join a team, get some community. And then once you figure out how to use Zwift, if you enjoy it, then maybe get more serious about the fundamentals and maybe learn how to train first.
What would you say, like, if I got on the Zwift and I'm just going in too hard, like what are some warning signs? If you're saying like, hey, I'm listening to this podcast because I saw the name on Zwift, this is my 3rd time riding ever. People could probably riding right now, listening to a podcast, but they're not sure they're into it. Like, what are some signs that like maybe you need to kind of chill out, take your time, and not just dive in all the way to racing immediately.
Well, I think the biggest thing is just, are you actually enjoying what you're doing right now? You know, if you're just going in and burying yourself from the get-go, that's really not good for longevity in the sport, I don't think. That's number one. And then number two is, if you are enjoying it, you know, are you giving yourself time to, you know, absorb the training stress, time to relax, you know, or are you just going in day out and just beating yourself up every single day? That's one thing I've noticed people do, is they kind of get really motivated, but they get almost too motivated, and they ride their bikes for 3 weeks straight, and then they burn themselves out in just a month.
Yeah.
So that's true with everybody, you know, especially January, February, New Year's resolution. This is going to be my year. I'm going to go to the gym every single day of this week. I'm going to get up at 5 in the morning.
Yep.
And, you know, that's awesome, but it also has to be sustainable. So if you're making changes to your life, they have to ideally be semi-flexible. They can't be so rigid, but they also have to be sustainable too.
Shane, one thing that I've noticed is that I get, when I've gone too deep and I've just had a run that seems like, you know, when you're on top and everything is clicking, it just seems like it's never ever going to end. You know, like I'm just going to be able to maintain this build up of fitness forever, and, you know, smashing Strava segments in my local single track. And then all of a sudden I get to a point where I don't even want to look at the bike, and I feel a depression. You know, like I feel,
right.
It's not a favorable feeling. And so that's something, I think this sort of leads to question 2, which is, how do you deal with the mental fatigue when the body is still strong? That's one of the questions that was crowdsourced in our poll. And so how do you get somebody to reset after hitting that? And I've seen this happen over and over again. Guys are on cloud 9. They're so excited. Maybe they're streaming and making videos, and just, they're all in with Zwift. And then all of a sudden they're just gone.
So I think, you know, in that case, having some variety to the training, I think, is important. And then even riding your bike outside, that's important too. But, you know, if you can do, you know, a Concept 2 rowing machine, or an elliptical, or go for a run, or just do something that's not riding your bike, that is still active, I think that's crucial. And then getting outside, I think that's another big one too, because Zwift is so good and they've made it so well that it's very addictive. But sometimes your body just needs to be, and your brain just needs to be outdoors, just enjoying the sunlight. And it doesn't have to be riding your bike. It can be just going for a walk or going for a hike. So I think variety, and then, you know, getting outdoors, I think that's the 2 biggest things that seem to work.
And do you have times a year with your athletes where you just take them off the program altogether?
I do. Yeah. So we do at least a 2-week transition period after their last A race of the season. And then we'll do at least a 1-week transition period after, if they have 2 races in the season. And then some of my athletes will need, you know, around this time of year, when you've already been racing for a couple months and you've had a pretty long buildup from February, March, and April, they may need a week just for doing some kind of athlete choice rides, is what I call them. So I'll basically say, you know, go out, ride your bike, but don't worry about cadence, speed, heart rate. Just literally put your, you know, computer in your cycling pocket and just go ride your bike, because they need that kind of, you know, downtime, and they need just to feel the wind in their hair and their sun on their face.
Wait, so hold on. You're saying that it's supposed to be fun.
Yeah. If I can get one thing across this podcast, cycling should be fun first and foremost. The title is very tongue-in-cheek, but it's also never going pro, and it's true. Very few people go pro at this sport, so having fun is very, very important. Granted, I'm not saying to be, you know, don't take it seriously, but don't take it too seriously either, that's a hard balance to kind of have.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, I feel you. I mean, you know, personally, like the mental fatigue thing you talked about, Ken, that's huge for me. Like I would get into these training plans, and I used to compete in triathlons, and I got up into some of the longer Ironman distances, and I got into these rhythms, and it was just focus, focus, focus. And I was the buzzkill who, you know, Friday night, it was, sorry guys, I got to go to bed at 9 o'clock because I got to be in the pool at 5. And like, it seems like even just naturally, like I only had that level of dedication in me for so long. And then I got through the race and I just didn't want to do anything anymore. And then even that with like Zwift, like I'll find that I'll go through seasons and like it's like hot or cold. And so really trying to find that balance of motivation with training, with trying to get productive, with still racing. It's a really hard balance. And then you throw in like kids, and like my daughter's going from 2 naps to 1 nap. And it's like just right when I get in the rhythm, everything changes. It's like just a bowl full of chaos. And like, if somebody can discover a way to continually get stronger on a bike while being a good parent, and like not lose your job, like I pay those people $1 million to share their wisdom with me. And then maybe that's you, Shane. Maybe you're the dude.
Well, I know a little bit, but unfortunately, there's no way to make a linear increase in your fitness month over month. There's always going to be ups and downs to everybody. And like I said in the very beginning, most athletes have 5 to 7 hours a week to train. So once you really get to that 7 hours a week training and you're having quality training every single hour of that week, then you have to either increase the volume and just make more time to train, or increase the intensity further. And a lot of times the intensity is already pretty high on the 7 hour a week training plan, or the 7 hour a week athletes. So really they have to increase their volume, and that's really hard to do. That's why pros don't train 7 hours a week. They train 30 hours a week, 20 hours a week, whatever it might be.
Sure.
But that's actually a good segue to go back. And sorry, we keep going back and forth. But the first question, the kind of main question was, what's the advantages of planning a yearly training plan versus going week to week? And I think you just hit it on the head, where if you can plan out your training on a yearly basis, you'll know when the recovery periods are coming. You'll know when the transitions are going to be. You'll know when the hard weeks are going to be, when the easy weeks are going to be. And I think that's a great way to keep yourself motivated through the hard times, because there is a vacation coming, or there's an easy week coming, instead of kind of going week to week, which is a little bit helter-skelter, where some weeks may be hard, some weeks may be easies, and you might have a month of hard workouts, which is then can lead to burnout on the 5th week.
Sure.
So that's why I think training on a yearly basis, even just not a yearly basis, but at least having some periodized approach to your training, I think that's important for a lot of reasons. And I think the motivation and not having to deal with the mental fatigue is one of those big things.
So where do you get an athlete started with an annual training program? Like what's square one?
Square one, well, is kind of counting backwards. So ideally, they'll have a goal event that they want to do well in, and then I'll count backwards from there to whatever day that we start with working together. So some athletes, they kind of wait till the last minute. They say, hey, I have 6 weeks before I'm competing in X race. I say, well, I hope you did your training, because I'm not going to help you much in 6 weeks.
Unless they're willing to write you a really big check.
Well, even then, I don't know, but because by 6 weeks, the hay is in the barn, but it's pretty much there. You really can't cram too much more for that test. So ideally, it'll be like a 4 to 6 week build. So it'll be, the very traditional base build, peak transition, base build, peak transition approach, where we'll do, progressively overloading the body during the base phase. And then we may continue that progressive overload in the build phase, but usually we'll do a block approach where we'll hit XTSS 3 weeks in a row, have a 4th week of lower TSS, and then do the same thing for build number 2.
All right. So define TSS. You just said lots of words that make sense to me, but like, I'm also a super geeky bike guy. So like, explain TSS, talk about like peak, talk about overload, even like base phase, like that. Cause we've got a lot of guys, and I ride with some of them who are just like brand new to all this. They bought a bike 2 months ago.
Sure. So base phase, I like to define as the period where you increase your aerobic capacity. So basically improving your aerobic ability to generate energy and power the bike. TSS is training stress score. So that's a way to objectify the training load on your body. And it's also a great way to plot it out on a chart over the course of a week, over the course of a month, to see where your trends are and how to keep everything balanced.
Really quickly, just about the training stress score. How's that tabulated? Do you use and again, like I kind of know some of these things, but what software do you use, and what metric are you looking at to calculate the TSS?
I use Training Peaks when I plan all my athletes training up, but TSS can be found in a lot of different things now. And if it's not called TSS, it might be called something else on Strava. I think Strava calls it training load. And then today's plan, I think, may call it something else. But everybody has a way to measure the load on your body.
See, I've always had like a bit of a problem with that, because like you get on, and I'm not saying the whole world needs to get on one boat, but like, like, I think a lot of people out there are gonna they're gonna be on Swift, they're gonna be on Strava. I also, I'm not trying to like say a dirty word amongst Swift people, but I also love Trainer Road. And I know Mr. Frothy Badger likes Trainer Road as well. So like each of those things has a different score, and I know they're each accurate to themselves. But like it's always been, I've been always kind of trying to figure out. So do you have any like super specific experience with some of those programs to kind of help us navigate looking at a cross to kind of like translate the different language? Because I know, for instance, Strava's and Zwift's are super different. Like, if you've got the Strava Pro, they kind of show you your weekly progression, and those scores are just like ludicrously different than Zwift.
Right. So I would think the best way to do it would just be to see what your power is producing, where if you use 2 power meters, you never know exactly how much power you're producing, because the 2 meters are always going to be different. Just like a man with 2 watches never knows what time it is. It's kind of the same thing. So
Proverbs.
I would pick one program and use that program. Don't, you can use other ones. Like I use Strava for the social component, for the pretty pictures, things like that. But Training Peaks is what I use for the actual data, the actual analysis, the communication, things like that. And same thing, Zwift is my training platform, but Training Peaks is my actual analysis platform. After the base phase is called a build phase, and that's where you start to get into more specific training and specific intervals for the goals and the demands of the event. So this is really where the training starts to become more individualized to the athlete, where the base phase, it's a little more general, a little bit more, again, just about improving aerobic capacity. The build phase is where you start to get into skills work and, criterium specific skills or cross specific skills, even Zwift specific skills if the athlete is doing a Zwift race. So after that, you go into, you call your taper or your peak or your whatever you want to call. Usually it's a week or 2 weeks, depending on how long the build up to it was, where you decrease the volume but maintain intensity. That way you kind of keep your legs feeling good, but you allow the fatigue to drop off, which allows your form to rise up. And you might have heard it on the Tour de France or whatever, he's on good form this year, or he has good form today or whatever. Form is essentially when you have high fitness and low fatigue, which is what you want to have on race day.
Oof. That's it. You just changed my life. Good form is high fitness and low fatigue.
You got it. That's what form is.
Man, that's it. That's my new tattoo.
And then most importantly, you go into your transition phase, which is when you have a 1 or 2 week athlete choice ride, whatever you want to call it, where you don't do any structure. You just go out and ride your bike or not. You can go and just, eat donuts and burritos all day long. Just kind of decompress a little bit and enjoy life for a while. And then you start back up again, either with a build phase if your event's coming close, or if you go into the winter, you can do your, strength phase or power development phase or whatever it might be.
Ken, I don't know about you, but the more he talks, the more I realize I know absolutely nothing about training that I've been doing my whole life.
Well, one thing that I decided to do is I was very confused about training and especially diet. And it's like I feel like I can get on my trainer and do the structured stuff and follow a training or a Trainer Road program, or I can follow a Zwift training program and do the work. But those workouts usually stop at no more than 2 hours. It's easy to, eat a granola bar and a couple of Gatorades and I'm fine. But for doing a 3-hour bike race in the middle of the summer heat, I was really struggling. I was falling apart. And so I reached out to Shane, and he went over my diet, he went over my training, and he gave me a little bit of direction. He got me going. He got me going in the right direction. We talked about like proper fueling, and there's still a lot of room to grow there. But just having somebody who does this for a living give me some direction was really helpful. It was worth the time.
I appreciate that. And also, let me put a giant asterisk right now where this is my opinion and what's worked for me. It's based on science as well, but this is my opinion. So other coaches may have complete opposite opinions than I will. So take that with a grain of salt.
That's nuts. Well, hey, I actually think that, I mean, that's like a huge point too, is that and you know, we're talking about like the good, the bad, and the ugly is like, I'm surprised that when I talk to people, how few people actually eat while they're on Zwift. Like, it's like, cause they're not outside, they think I don't need to eat. But if you're on a trainer doing something for an hour and a half, like there's no way, I mean, at least for me, there's no way I can do that with any sort of, I don't know, quality if I'm not eating something halfway through.
Yeah, it really depends on, you know, how long the ride is and how intense the ride is going to be. So as long as you have enough glycogen stored in your liver and in your muscles, you can get through a pretty strenuous 90-minute workout without too much need for, you know, extra calories or food. Once you get over that 90-minute mark, or if you enter the ride in a nutrition deficit, that's when you have to start to supplement earlier. So that's where like nutrition isn't, you know, a breakfast, lunch, dinner kind of thing. Nutrition is like a 24/7 kind of thing.
Okay, so let's get specific. So we were talking about doing stories. Ken, I asked you earlier, like your funny race stories or your biggest race stories. My worst one was I had a friend I had a friend from a city I won't name, and another guy who they became kind of arch rivals on Zwift, and their existences, they became just to like beat the other guy. They never even met, but like, I guess everybody needs a dragon to slay. So this guy was like, I guess it'd be funnier if I just named names, but we won't do that. So he, for the very last race of their series on Zwift, was like, hey man, you've got to get up. You've got to help pull me up this mountain. Like I need, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And he'd asked me for weeks. And finally I relented, and it ended up with me getting up at 3:45 in the morning Central Time to be warmed up and ready to do like a 5:30 race for Eastern Time. So I was on my bike at 4:30. I understand. I hear the laughter, but like I was dead, man. I got up to try to eat, and it didn't matter. Like we started the climb, and I was just done. Like it was. I might as well have logged on to Zwift and then laid back down in my bed.
Yeah, I think you know what, I think I was in that race, and I think I know the guys that you're talking about.
Because you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah,
so you know.
And so without us getting into too many inside jokes, so we had a 12-week long series, and it was the closest battle between the two B guys I've ever seen. I mean, it was just, the way it played out was beautiful, and
Let's call the first guy just Dustin. You know, let's just call him Dustin. Might not be his name.
Yeah. I don't remember the other guy's name, but it was a really close race. But yeah, I mean, you know, I have definitely seen people take Zwift too seriously to the point they're rage quitting, just like you know, like just angry teenagers. You know, throwing the mic down, throwing the controller down, and walking out the room. And I'm just like, God, if you ever get there, you know, it might be time to unplug for a little while.
So Shane, like, tell me, like, okay, let's say I'm gonna race like an idiot at 5 a.m, which I'm never doing again. By the way, that's my first and last ever again. I want to race at like 2 p.m. with only retired people. They still beat me, but like at least I've got lunch in me. So like, what is there even like nutritionally, like, is there even a way to get your body like primed and prepped to do something that early that doesn't require like getting up at 2 a.m. or something? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so it's basically you have to kind of fold your clothes the night before, where you want to have a really carbohydrate dense dinner. That way your body will replenish the glycogen stores in your muscles, because you may wake up in a fasted state, which means you're out of glycogen in your liver, not out of glycogen, but your liver is low on glycogen, but your muscles should still have glycogen in them to fuel like I said, a 60 to 90-minute workout, depending on nutrition status entering the ride. And then you can easily top off the kind of blood sugar just by, drinking some orange juice or, eating a quick bagel or something like that. Typically the earlier or the sooner you have to race, the less you want to eat and the more simple the sugar should be. And then vice versa. The more time you have, you can eat more actual, kind of food where you have 2-3 hours before an event.
So if I'm gonna get up at 5 and race at 5:30, I should just eat like 6 spoonfuls of sugar.
Or honey on a English muffin. That's a really good one. A glass of orange juice, things like that. Something that's really, really simple to digest and something that you would ideally practice before. So kind of the old saying, nothing new on race day. Even though it's a virtual race, it is still a race. So you want to kind of have practiced what your body can tolerate, what you can stomach before. But it's really important to enter it recovered. So what you eat for dinner or for dessert or whatever is more important than before, because you want to, that's when you have the time to actually make an impact in how you enter the race.
You guys did not think my spoonfuls of sugar joke was very funny.
Sorry.
We'll edit in some laughter after. So I do have
your mic is so loud over there. I'm gonna have to mute. Yeah, I'm gonna have to mute your mic. I keep hearing the gate opening.
Maybe
sounds like you're sucking out of the top of the Ready Whip canister.
What are you doing over there?
I'm like sitting down. I'm literally doing nothing.
Maybe it's
maybe I'm a mouth breather.
All right, so Shane, I guess one question that I do have is, if you are one of these people that is, you're waking up and you're on the bike within 30 minutes of your feet hitting the ground, are you just going to have to accept that you're making some performance sacrifices, that you're never going to be 100% at that time? Or is it possible that, do you find that some of your athletes do perform best first thing in the morning?
I think athletes tend to perform better in the morning, but not first thing in the morning. So they tend to perform better after they've had, 90 minutes to drink a cup of coffee, have an actual breakfast, kind of wake up a little bit, and then ride. I don't think anybody feels great after, waking up and then getting on the bike and hammering 30 minutes after they wake up. And then the other issue too is, we're not going to bed. Well, typically I can't speak for everybody, but we're not going to bed at 8 p.m. and waking up at 5 a.m. We might be going to bed at 11:30, waking up at 4:30, 5 o'clock. So you're not getting 10 hours of sleep. You might only be getting 6 or 7 hours of sleep. And we're also, the sleep we're getting isn't usually, it may be quality, but there's always one eye open or one ear open listening for the baby monitor, making sure that, there's no coughing and there's both still breathing and, all those things that go through a parent's mind all the time.
Breathing children are crucial to a strong Zwift race.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I will say this, looking back, when I first had our daughter and I didn't have a shed yet, it was still too cold and dark, and my wife, she's a personal trainer, so she leaves really early. I would have the baby monitor and watching GCN videos on my iPad, and I would set my trainer up in the carport in the freezing cold, and would train until she would wake up and I would hear her on the baby monitor. And she was, 1 year old, 2 years old, and it was miserable. And I could maybe do that 2 days a week just to keep my fitness in the wintertime just from going to zero.
Sure.
Is the best I could do. And then, I got my shed and got Zwift, and even with the most basic laptop setup and a space heater next to me, it was a world better than I had ever experienced before. And so one thing I think is important to acknowledge in this podcast is that we're really in the golden age of indoor training. There's options, and trying to get this across to my cycling buddies who've been at it for decades. When I try to speak to them about, hey man, try Zwift, it's fun, they just cannot conceive of it, because they've always done traditional rides on a trainer using a heart rate monitor. and they just don't know better, you know. But it's that startup investment of spending $1,000 on a trainer or a power meter, and you know, downloading the software and making sure you have the equipment to run it. It's daunting, and it's hard to say.
Yeah, it's a hurdle.
Yeah, it's a hurdle. It's hard to say, like, hey, listen, you know, training on an indoor trainer has always sucked. You're not going to get me to pay $1,000 to start doing it more.
Right. And I can also say that same thing for, you know, cycling coaches and triathlon coaches that thought this was just going to be kind of a fad and it was never going to last. And, you know, why am I involved in Zwift so heavily, and why am I involved in it since the beta days? Well, look at it now. You know, what other cycling team or what other cycling program got $120 million, you know, round B valuation or investment?
Right.
Well, and from my perspective, like, I mean, I used to just like watch Netflix and be on like just a stupid fluid trainer, and I hated life. But like in it, I really felt like I was just trying to hang on to fitness.
Sure.
I wasn't like growing at all. But then like I started using Zwift through this last winter, and I came out of the winter strong, and I'm out riding with my buddies, and it was, you know, let's be real, it's more fun when you're the guy causing people to suffer versus the one who's at the back of the train suffering. And like that was just Zwift, like doing races and doing some, you know, even soft training plans. Like I came out of the winter not tired, but I felt strong. So it's worth it. I think it's worth the investment.
100%. 100%.
Free infomercial.
Right.
Yeah, hopefully my friends will listen to this podcast and say, you get with it, get with the time. Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you everybody for taking the time to join the Never Going Pro podcast about riding bikes, being parents, and trying super hard at both. Thank you both, Chris and Shane, for joining today, and for all of the folks that put forth questions. We really do appreciate it, and we hope that you'll come back and listen to more. So that's it for tonight, and thank you for joining, and we will see you next time.